Welcome to Deep Roots and New Growth in Wabaunsee County. This virtual exhibit is an online companion to the traveling Smithsonian exhibition, Crossroads, Change in Rural America, currently on exhibit at the Volland Store near Alma, Kansas, in the heart of the Flint Hills Tallgrass Prairie. Deep Roots and New Growth explores the rural culture of ranching and the small town life we treasure in Wabaunsee County. The exhibit has been designed by committees in our local community and with help from the Wabaunsee County Historical Society. We have worked steadily since 2020 discussing what makes our community unique, why we value our traditions, and how we look ahead to the future. It is our own story of rural America. Please enjoy what you are about to see and visit our website, thevollandstore.com, for more of our story.
Hello, I'm Mike Beam, and I have the pleasure and the honor to serve as the Kansas Secretary of Agriculture. But prior to that, most of my professional career has been working for and with farmers and ranchers all across the state. And I'd have to admit, it wasn't until probably the last half of my career as we talked about issues and policies that I really started to understand how farmers and ranchers, it's more than economics. It's about the place, it's about the land, and no more important than the Kansas Flint Hills. So we're gonna have some conversations, and I want to introduce Joe and Barb. Let them introduce themselves. Talk about your experiences with the land.
My name is Barb Downey, and I'm here with my husband, and I'll let him introduce
I'm
himself.
Joe Carpenter.
And together we operate a family ranch here in the Flint Hills of Kansas called Downey Ranch. What Mike said about the land is absolutely spot on. I think it's fair to say Joe and I consider ourselves stewards and temporary caretakers of a resource that existed way before us and will continue on way after us. But Joe, why don't you tell them a little bit about our operation here in the Flint Hills?
We are a cow-calf operation based in Wabaunsee County with pastures in Riley County.
The cow-calf operation, for those of you out there that might not know, we have mama cows that give birth to a calf every year, and they take this this grass that we're surrounded by, and by the miracle of the rumen, turn it into high quality protein. So they take a non-usable product for us and turn it into something that we can use.
Well, I would say that I'm not native, or nor do I live day to day in the Flint Hills, but definitely from an agricultural community. And from the very beginning, as a child, I grew up on the land. And so I think it might be of interest if you would talk about when you first were introduced, or when you first started having an appreciation for this is something really special.
Well, I personally grew up in agriculture, but not in the Flint Hills. And my first exposure was in college, and that I would drive out on the weekends out into the Flint Hills just to get away from the stresses and strains of being a college student, and to find that solitude and enjoy the wide open spaces. I was fortunate enough that our agricultural operations expanded then to Kansas, and right after school I moved out to the Flint Hills, and it's just an absolutely magical place to live. You're in rhythm and in sync with the seasons of the year, with wildlife that you find out in the prairie, and it just becomes part of your daily existence. You're so connected to the land and to the environment that you just can't separate from it. Joe grew up in western Sedgwick County.
Yeah, I kind of call that area the opposite of the Flint Hills. Growing up there, there's any creek had a mud bottom in it. I didn't know Kansas had rocks, and so after coming to Kansas State University, I just spent a little time out here and maybe at Pillsbury Crossing, and saw that Kansas has some pretty good hills and beautiful grass rather than just wheat country, and it's just kind of a different attraction that draws you in, and as we met and started dating, and it's just kind of grown from there. That we'll talk more later on about how it's developed for us.
I think, Mike, what is special about the Flint Hills is this is native tallgrass prairie, which means this ground was never plowed. This ground is growing the same grass that our predecessors would have experienced 10,000 years ago. It looks very much the same. So it's one of the few places in the United States and maybe even in the world that is relatively untouched by human hands. And that's, when you step back from that, it's just part of what makes this place, this land, so dang special.
A lot of people think land and nature is they find it very therapeutic. You're out here daily, multiple seasons. Do you find that it is moving and soothing to you? And how would you describe that to people who may have a hard time understanding that?
Well, Jim Hoyce, talks about the Flint Hills, and he says it's not a place that takes your breath away. It's a place that lets you catch your breath, and that's exactly it. Being out here through all the seasons, watching the grass change from after burning season to greening up, to going pale in the late summer, and then finally this color in the winter. It's just something that relaxes your soul and gives you a new perspective. I don't know, maybe on the cycle of life, but the change with the seasons, and then just the change with the shadows throughout the year. The big hill behind us here looks so different through the seasons and through the day even, and it has a terribly calming effect.
I think one of the real upsides about having the kind of job that we do is that this is our office. This is where we come to work every day, and so you're out in it all of the time, and I think that's one of the real rewards of this line of work. Now, when it's -10 in February and the wind is howling, that's one of the downsides. But, even outside of work, I find reasons to get out here, when I have quote unquote time off. I'll go for hikes out here. Sometimes you just come and you sit. I've trail run before and trail run out here. So this is not only the place that we work, it's the place that we recreate and have family time. And we've been out here camping with, our daughters. They grew up, we have a picture of the oldest sitting, buck naked in a little stream, just patting her hands on top of the water. So, it's the cradle to grave place for us.
So what's your favorite season in the Flint Hills?
What's your favorite?
I don't know.
They're all unique.
They're all so unique. If we were here at sunset, the shadows on these, especially on the ridges coming down the hills, are just spectacular. When it's burned black and you can see just how much rock there is out here, that's another moment that almost takes your breath away.
For me, it's spring though, when after it's been burned and you just have this carpet of green everywhere and the wildflowers are really starting to come up. That's, there's something, during the growing season, there is always something in bloom out here. Sometimes you have to look a little closer and down. Some days the hillsides will be covered with cone flowers and it's spectacular, and then other times it's a little more subtle, but it's during that spring that is the time for me that the Flint Hills really shine.
Yeah, perhaps, Joe, one of the reasons it's hard to pick is because at least I've found that these seasons go fast. So now you can feel it. We'll be soon into spring, and so if you happen to enjoy this, you kind of take it in knowing that we're getting ready to go to the next stage, and it's always moving. It'll be continuing to move for those who come after us.
Yeah, it's different every day, isn't it?
So you work out here every day. You live out here. Surely there's some place special, or some place that you will always treasure as a special memory in your life.
There's a hill right behind us that is the highest point on our entire ranch. And here's where you find out how emotional this connection is. And when my dad died, I hiked up here, crying the whole way from the gate, got on that highest point, and that is where I feel that connection. We hadn't had the funeral yet. I picked up stones for all of us, and one bigger one from the highest spot, and that biggest one went in the casket with my dad. And to me, that was connecting all of us in that moment to my dad, just kind of forever. Because he was as connected to the land as I obviously am, which you can see through my emotion. And it's just, I mentioned that it's over the generations, and it's something that is here and will be here long after. And it becomes part of you, just part of your core that is hard to convey sometimes.
Joe, Barb mentioned also that she had a picture of one of your daughters playing in the stream. So there has to be places that bring back smiles.
There's a lot of them.
They're everywhere.
Yes, they're everywhere. I remember just north of where we are right now, we were doing a little trail ride as a family, and Barb turned around and took a picture of me and the girls that's just gorgeous. And they were fairly small at the time, and that was just something that I appreciate all the time, and I hope that they do as they get older, and maybe their children will as well. And she mentioned camping out here, when they were smaller. We had a lot of special times just disconnecting from everything and just being a family out here.
But you'll find yourself out in some place, and it sparks a memory and a reminiscing episode. You'll say, oh, do you remember when it was really hot that day, and we were, all out here, and then, oh, yeah, something happened. But they're just all around you. Everywhere here has got some tangible memory attached to it, or experience, or event that you remember with great fondness.
And it may be something, maybe not that happened, but something that we found or discovered that was unique, and just set that moment off.
I would guess most people who live in this region, in the Kansas Flint Hills, probably don't have an appreciation for the cultural and ecological significance. This is the last of the large intact tallgrass prairie in North America, and it's right here. We sit amongst it. We know that Native Americans moved through this country. It's just the real deal. And some would say that we must be careful because it's fragile. But also, I think you guys have probably found year to year, drought, extreme temperatures, it's, I would say, probably very resilient. So you might share with you why you think that is. Why is this just continues to be very important ecosystem and a grazing source for ranchers?
Well, I think it's partly because it's somewhat forged in fire. Fire is a very important part that keeps the grassland a grassland. It keeps it from being forested, and it's been that way for 10,000 years. Whether it's Mother Nature doing it or human intervention, I consider that a natural process as well, since that happened so long ago and was just a natural part of the tall grass. With its root system and growing points below ground, it's durable and can come back from about anything.
So Joe, what do you think? How far below ground would you find roots with a stalk of grass like this?
It just depends, but it could be many feet.
20, 30 feet probably?
Possibly, yep.
And I think to your, both of you guys' point about the resiliency of this, it's because this is the native environment, and this is the native ecosystem that it wants to be here. So while it is fragile, while it can be hurt, coaxing it back to the way it should be just requires fire. It requires the hoof action of a large grazing ruminant, and it requires respect for all of the other pieces of that ecosystem. And that's why cattle ranching is so well suited for the Flint Hills. They need each other, and they thrive together.
And I think if you compare this to other grazing areas across the country, this would be more resilient because we have enough rainfall. It can be you can go through a pretty extensive drought, and eventually the normal rainfall will help it recover, which isn't the case in a lot of rangeland in more arid parts of the country. But as resilient it is, though, there has to be threats, and I think we should probably talk about what are the threats to this region.
Well, there's a lot of them. Probably the one that concerns me most right now is Sericea lespedeza. We avoided that for a number of years before it made its way here, and now that it's here, it's beginning to show up everywhere. The bad thing about it is it kind of enjoys fire too, and fire actually helps it spread. So it's something that really doesn't fit. It's very invasive. It will choke out the grass and become a big clump of brush in just a matter of a few years, and it's just something that doesn't belong. Well, Mike, another threat that concerns us is Old World bluestem, or Caucasian bluestem. It's a grass. I mean, during its peak growing season, it's nutritious grass, but it's not one that's native here, and it's a little bit of a different growing season than the native grasses, but it does creep slowly, and it is invading mainly from road ditches and a few rare places where someone planted it years ago.
A lot of people don't know what it looks like. It's hard for a lot of us to
Well,
determine.
I think it's ugly. It's a very light-colored, fine-stemmed grass that's really thick and really difficult for wildlife to even survive through. I mean, it's just that thick.
There's plenty of other invasive species too that threaten.
Yeah, those two are a man brought, or introduced by man species. There's also native species that Mother Nature has been keeping in check for forever, and due to different management practices or lack thereof, these species, such as the eastern red cedar or dogwood, they can really encroach and take over quite a bit. Oklahoma State Forestry did a survey a few years ago that Oklahoma was losing close to 800 acres of pasture a day to eastern red cedar, and I can't imagine that we're much behind that.
And I think why it's so difficult to grasp is it's gradual, and if you live here, drive through here day after day, you don't see it. But if you come back in chunks of 5 or 10 years, it's just, oh my gosh.
Yeah, you can really see a difference, especially the cedars. They reach a critical mass, and then all of a sudden they're a full-fledged tree, and they escape an average controlled burn. And at that point, you're looking at mechanical control, clipping those cedars off to get it back under control.
Which can cost as much as what you would gain economically from grazing.
Oh, absolutely. And then you look around kind of at this ground behind us, to mechanically control becomes almost impossible. So you can't let it get out ahead of you.
And I think what I've learned through the years about woody tree infestation is it's not natural for wildlife. And this is the one point that I've found that wildlife biologists and ranchers will rally behind, because our nesting areas for birds, we need that open space. It's counterintuitive. You would think more trees is better for wildlife habitat, but for wildlife habitat that's natural to the tallgrass prairie, it's not. It's not at all.
Trees become a place for a predator, excuse me, to whether it's a hawk to perch, and prairie chickens, they don't want anything that gives a predator the look down on them. So you're right, the open spaces are critical to our native wildlife populations.
Is there any other threats to this that you might think of besides plants?
Well, there's always the threat that people bring to the prairie that is not necessarily intentional, but this is such a beautiful place to be that it draws people. And fragmentation becomes one of, I think, the biggest threats to the prairie around here. And when you're talking fragmentation, I'm talking about what used to be thousands of acres and under one continuous management starts being fragmented into 160 acres here and 80 acres there, a home site built, which usually brings in windbreaks and other artificial things. And all of a sudden you do not have that thousands of acres that the wildlife is used to moving through unimpeded, and instead you have all of these breaks. And then what also becomes a concern there too, when you fragment, you have different management styles, and you no longer can get possibly a good burn, or you can't get a good rotational graze through there, a big concentration of animals that then moves on. Instead you have a season-long grazing on that 100 acres or something like that. And all of those change the prairie in subtle but real ways.
Sometimes you'll get into a discussion about, development progress, whether it be energy or, highways, transportation. We all want that. We all want these communities to survive, but we always need to keep in mind it needs to be done smartly, because it does impact. It does cause some degree of fragmentation.
It certainly does. It certainly does. And it behooves us all to figure out a way that is a sustainable way to keep this prairie like it is. And for us, again, why the Flint Hills is the Flint Hills is because the way that the humans are using it meshes perfectly with the way nature developed it. So for us, it's a cattle ranching enterprise on here that not only supports our family, but then supports the tallgrass prairie. And that is what, to me, makes something sustainable, when every piece of the puzzle can work together.
Well, one of the real thrills in my role as working with farmers and ranchers that I find probably the most rewarding is it's predominantly families. It's multi-generation families. And explain a little bit about how your family fits in the generations involved in ranching, and particularly maybe this ranch.
So, our fondest wish is that our daughters will follow in our footsteps and continue on the ranch. They're both in college right now. They both intend that they will come back to this ranch. And prior to this, that my dad and Joe and I worked day to day together on this ranch. The girls used to, when they were little kids, Dad would be out here and he'd load up the girls and they'd go run to town, maybe go to the sale barn, have a have an early lunch or a late breakfast. But that's, you know, one of the really special and unique things about ag in general and ranching is it's multi-generational, and your kids are at work with you and you're working with your spouse every day. Sometimes Joe might tell you that's bad, but you get to spend your days together as working and living in this environment and enjoying each other's company. It's not just an hour at the dinner table at the end of the day. It's all day long.
We've discovered a system of working cattle. It's called low stress, and it's low stress for the cattle, but the thing we enjoy most is that it makes it low stress for the family, so that when we're working together, we're truly working together, we're enjoying what we're doing, and we're really a family team that we have a goal in mind for that day, or for that week, or for the year, or for the future. And it gives us a real opportunity to enjoy the time that we're working for that goal.
So if you had a chance, if you were going to leave a legacy or leave a message to future generations, and you would record that today, what would that be, especially as it relates to the Flint Hills and this ranch?
That it's special, all of it, that it's worth the day-to-day effort, that it's worth the struggle to keep it all together, that it's worth the sacrifice, that it is the genesis of everything that I hold dear, whether it's the family, whether it's the land, whether it's working with the animals. It's worth fighting for.
And for me, it's all that, and it's kind of an honor to be the one in charge of maintaining this, and it's more incredible sense of responsibility. This has been here for 10,000 years, and I don't want to be the one to screw it up. So I want it to look better, every year from what it did the year before, and keep that legacy going.
Yeah, you're right. What Dad would always say is, with great privilege comes great responsibility, and that is true. It is a privilege to be out here, but it brings with it an awesome responsibility.